I recently watched a show called Agatha All Along. It's a show about witches, and it is by far the most explicitly queer Marvel Cinematic Universe project yet, and there was a scene in it that made me really feel, well, seen. In it, a character named William Kaplan has a bar mitzvah celebration. This may sound ordinary. People have bar mitzvah ceremonies and parties all the time, but I've been watching MCU projects since the first Avengers movie, and despite the fact that many of the founders of comic books as we know them today were Jewish superheroes have been few and far between on screens both big and small. So I was really happy about this moment. But when I looked on social media, I saw some pushback I wasn't expecting. I heard the argument that calling this young witch here Jewish was wrong because, and huge spoiler warning for Agatha All Along ahead, you've been warned this whole video, the show plays a game of musical chairs but with souls regarding who actually inhabits that body, and let's just say William Kaplan does not find a seat. So, wait, does this count as good Jewish representation? Well, to answer that question, we have to answer this one. Is Billy, the 16-year-old witch that we follow in Agatha All Along, actually Jewish? And the fact that we're asking that question to begin with begs a bigger question. What's the Marvel Cinematic Universe's deal with Jewish people? Now, before we go all the way down the rabbit hole, you might be asking yourself, who are you to decide? So, let me start by citing my credentials. 1, I'm Jewish. 2, I ran a Tumblr blog throughout middle and into high school dedicated to posting about Marvel, which was 3, divided evenly between posting about how Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes from the movies should kiss, and about my absolute life-consuming obsession with the Marvel Comics team, the Young Avengers, both the 2005 and the 2013 comic runs, as well as all of the standalone and crossover comics between them, particularly the character of Billy Kaplan, known first as Asgardian but later as Wiccan, who I imprinted on so hard that I would later gender transition into the grown-up version of him. I guess that is to say then, that I've been wanting to make this video for a decade. I also want to say up front that I am going to be talking about Judaism, the religion as I observe it, coming from a perspective somewhere between Reform and Reconstructionist practice. However, I will also be discussing sects of Judaism that I am not a part of. I hope I have succeeded in talking about all forms of Jewish practice with empathy and respect. I thank everyone in my comment section for being normal about Jewish people. I'm thanking you in advance. Thank you! Okay, so to talk about the character of Billy Maximoff and or William Kaplan as depicted in the Agatha All Along TV show, we first have to talk about Wanda Maximoff. Wanda Maximoff in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a case study in ethnic erasure, one so egregious that it gained the MCU a reputation as anti-Semitic. But is this reputation deserved? To answer that question, we must ask, how did the Scarlet Witch, a Marvel Comics character of definitely Romani and maybe also Jewish descent, end up as a vaguely European white lady? From the beginning, Wanda and her twin brother Pietro Maximoff have had a pretty convoluted backstory in the Marvel Comics. I found an excellent explainer on it by Tumblr user Bobby Morses, which I'm citing heavily here. In their first ever appearance in an X-Men comic in 1964, the twins were introduced as being from the heart of Europe, where Magneto rescued them from an angry mob and recruited them to join him in his Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. From the beginning, the twins are, at most, reluctant villains, and they quickly join the Avengers alongside other former villain Hawkeye. They both have their powers because they're mutants. Wanda has sort of unspecified witchy reality manipulation abilities, and Pietro has the classic super speed. In a 1966 Avengers comic, their home village makes an appearance, and we get a more specific location for it, a fictional mountain called Wundagore Mountain in southeastern Europe. After a couple of false starts regarding the twins' parentage, we learn that Pietro and Wanda were born to a woman named Magda, who abandoned them. The twins were left in the care of Django and Maria Maximoff, a Romani couple whose own twins had just died. Magda is revealed later down the line to also have been Romani herself, as well as being a Holocaust survivor. So, okay, cool. We have a definitive pick for mom, and we know who raised the twins. All three of those characters are Romani, which tells us pretty definitively that Wanda and Pietro are Romani in terms of both culture and ethnicity. But who's the father? Turns out it's Magneto. We learned this in the early 80s at the same time that Magneto is first revealed to be a Jewish Holocaust survivor. Also, today I learned Magneto wasn't revealed to be a Holocaust survivor until 18 years after his character introduction. Huh. There's a little bit of back and forth on ethnicities in the middle there, but for some 30-odd years, this was the accepted canon. Wanda and her twin brother Pietro Maximoff had a Romani biological mother and an Ashkenazi Jewish biological father, and were raised by a Romani couple. To be clear, Magda and the Maximoffs who adopted Wanda and Pietro were never depicted as Jewish. Some sources seem to have conflated their Romani identity with Judaism, but this is incorrect. In describing their identity, an article from dubiously reputable online media news site Screen Rant says,
"While she and her brother's backstory have been altered numerous times, they have always come from a Romani bloodline. Romani Jews are some of the oldest Jewish communities in existence. That ties into Scarlet Witch because her bloodline has seen generations of people with the same abilities as her."
While there are, in fact, Romani Jews in the real world, Magda, Django, and Marya have never been depicted as Jewish within the comics. Most Romani people in the present day are Catholic or Muslim. So, this begs the question, when this parentage was canon, and it isn't anymore, but we'll get into that in a minute. When Magda and Magneto were Wanda and Pietro's parents, were Wanda and Pietro Jewish? I'd argue that it depends what you mean when you say Jewish. See, Judaism is historically a matrilineal religion. That is, your mother must be Jewish for you to be Jewish. Otherwise, you have to convert, which is a long and complicated process. So, if someone's mom is Jewish, but their dad isn't, every denomination of Judaism will recognize that person as Jewish, though more Orthodox Jews, that is to say, those who practice a very traditional form of Judaism, may not recognize the marriage between those two parents as legitimate. However, if someone's father is Jewish and their mother is not, the opinion on whether that person is Jewish varies from movement to movement. For those who aren't familiar with the modern sects of Judaism, here is an entirely too brief and oversimplified summary following this nifty chart. The sects differ in how strongly they believe that halakha, or Jewish law, must be followed by Jewish people. Reform Judaism believes that halakha is entirely non-binding. That is, Jews don't have to follow the traditional rabbinical laws to be Jewish. Conservative Jews, not to be confused with conservative political movements like the American Republican Party, they're totally different. I know it's confusing, I'm sorry. Conservative Jews espouse a motto of tradition and change and hold that halakha must be followed, but halakha itself may be amended to suit modern needs. They have a rabbinical assembly that does that amending and establishes the movement's official positions on assorted issues. Orthodox Jews believe that halakha is both binding and unchanging, and so Jews must follow the same Jewish law that they have always followed, no exceptions. Orthodox and conservative Judaism both hold a strictly matrilineal form of descent. That is, you must have a Jewish mother or undergo a full conversion supervised by a rabbi from the correct Jewish movement to be Jewish. Here's the conservative stance on that according to a 1988 Teshuvot, or Interpretation of Jewish Law, authored by Rabbi Avram Israel Reisner and approved by the Conservative Rabbinical Assembly.
In the case where the natural mother of the child is known to be a non-Jew, either in the case of Jewish father, patrilineal child, or that of an adoptee, there is no question that the child requires conversion.
AKA, if your mom isn't Jewish, you have to convert to be considered a Jew. On the other hand, in 1983, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the group that makes the official stances of the Reform movement, adopted the Resolution on Patrilineal Descent, which reads as follows.
The Central Conference of American Rabbis declares that the child of one Jewish parent is under the presumption of Jewish descent. This presumption of the Jewish status of the offspring of any mixed marriage is to be established through appropriate and timely public and formal acts of identification with the Jewish faith and people. The performance of these mitzvot serves to commit those who participate in them, both parent and child, to Jewish life.
That is to say, if a child has one Jewish parent, whether that parent is the child's mother or father, if that child adopts a Hebrew name, has a bar mitzvah, has a Jewish confirmation, and or undertakes Torah study, that child is to be considered as Jewish, no exceptions. For my 2 cents, I'm with the reform movement on this one. I think the idea of matrilineality is outdated and no longer necessary in a world where genetic testing is possible. There didn't really used to be a way to prove that someone's dad was actually their dad, but there totally is now. I'm of the opinion that patrilineal Jews ought to be accepted as fully Jewish and welcomed into any synagogue if they wish to become observant, no conversion required. But I'm not a rabbi. Yet. No, that's a joke. Bubby, if you're seeing this, that was a joke and not a promise. I was kidding. I'm not going to. All of this is then to say that when Magda and Magneto were canonically Wanda and Pietro's parents, if Wanda and Pietro decided they wanted to become observant Jews, some rabbis might accept them as such on the basis of their father being Jewish, but most would require that they undergo a conversion since their mother was not Jewish, and also since they seem to not have engaged in appropriate and timely acts of identification with the Jewish faith during their upbringing. So, if Magneto and Magda are their parents, are Wanda and Pietro Jewish? If you mean ethnically that they are of Jewish descent, then definitively yes. If you mean religiously, we can pretty definitively say no. Their mother is not Jewish, and they were not raised Jewish, and so as far as I can tell, neither has adopted a Hebrew name, had a bar bat mitzvah, had a Jewish confirmation, and or undertaken Torah study. It stands to reason, then, that religiously they're not Jewish. So, following the conventions established by esteemed Jewish studies academic Adam Sandler in his seminal work The Hanukkah Song, we might call them half-Jewish.
Paul Newman's half Jewish, and Goldie Hawn's half too. Put them together, what a fine-looking Jew.
The term is often used to refer to someone who has a Jewish father and doesn't practice Judaism. So, this parentage was pretty much settled comic book law until 2015, when it was revealed. And by revealed, I do mean invented. This was not some long-planned plot twist or anything. That Magneto and Magda were not actually Wanda and Pietro's parents, and that their biological parents were instead actually Maximoffs, their mother being a woman named Natalia Maximoff, the sister of their adoptive father Django, making their adoptive parents their biological aunt and uncle. It was made canon that the Maximoffs were not mutants, but instead a different stupid thing. They got their powers by being experimented on by a guy called the High Evolutionary, and also Wanda inherited some magic through her bloodline. This happened because, at the time, Disney owned the Avengers, including the characters of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, but Fox owned the X-Men. This is movie rights I'm talking about. There was a bunch of dumb stuff that happened in Marvel Comics at this time because of this. I would know, I was reading them. So, in current Marvel Comics canon, unless they changed it at some point in the process of me making this video, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff are fully Romani, with no Jewish heritage whatsoever. As such, the current answer to, is Wanda Maximoff from the Marvel Comics Jewish, is a resounding no. She is, however, canonically Romani, and has been in some form or another since 1979. So I would definitely say that casting a canonically Romani character as a blonde-haired white lady is ethnic erasure. There was a lot of outroar about this when Elizabeth Olsen was first cast, particularly once the rewriting of Wanda's backstory was revealed. In Avengers Age of Ultron, the movie in which Wanda and her brother Pietro are properly introduced, we learn that their backstory is different from both their original comics backstory as mutants and their retconned comic backstory as belonging to a lineage of folk practitioners of magic. Instead, they get their powers through, and I wish I was making this up, being experimented on by Hydra. That's right, the group first introduced in Captain America: The First Avenger as the Nazis' Deep Science Organization. Pietro and Wanda volunteered to join and got their powers that way. Both Magda and Magneto were Holocaust survivors in Marvel Comics, and even after the retcon, Wanda and Pietro's new parents were still Romani. The Romani people, alongside the Jewish people, were slaughtered en masse during the Holocaust at the hands of the Nazis. The fact that Wanda and Pietro on purpose joined an organization whose origins were being a branch of the fucking Nazi party is insulting. It's insulting. The MCU has tried to put distance between Hydra and the Nazis, but they failed time and time again because that's stupid and they're Nazis. Sure, Wanda and Pietro were taken advantage of and manipulated and mad at Tony Stark for being a weapons dealer and whatever, but it was a wildly tone-deaf and tasteless character choice, and it made it clear from the get-go that the MCU would not be exploring either of Wanda and Pietro's potential comic backstories. Also, Pietro dies in this movie, so now I can start saying Wanda instead of Pietro and Wanda. Him dying was also stupid, in my opinion. These choices caused some backlash, mostly in the Tumblr sphere, but it died down pretty fast, and not much of it made it into the mainstream. However, there was no avoiding the outcry during the airing of WandaVision. The TV show focused solely on Wanda Maximoff as its protagonist, when writers doubled down on their completely arbitrary rewrite of Wanda's backstory to remove any trace of her Romani heritage. Instead, she is from the fictional Eastern European nation of Sokovia, and is what we can only call ambiguous white. There's nothing wrong with someone being ambiguous white. I loved the first Avengers movie, but this is just disingenuous to the character and serves to whitewash and erase one of the few things approaching positive Romani representation in the media. Not that I'm saying that the comics handled it well either, don't get me wrong, but at least the comics tried. This also meant that many people dismissed their hopes of getting Jewish representation in the form of Wanda Maximoff's two sons, Billy and Tommy. In WandaVision, she gave birth to them, aided by magic, and they aged rapidly, living about a week, real time, before dying but being aged up to 10 years old. They would reappear in the film Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, when Wanda tears apart a lot of universes and kills a lot of people attempting to bring them back, ultimately failing. In the comics, Wanda's son Billy in particular is a explicitly gay Jewish character with a Jewish foster family who has a Jewish wedding. By erasing Wanda's Jewish roots, many feared that even if the characters of Billy and Tommy did reappear after their seeming death, their Jewish identities too would be erased. To add insult to injury, in the Halloween episode of WandaVision, Wanda wears a costume which looks very similar to the one she wore for decades in the comics. When asked what her costume is, she describes herself as a Sokovian fortune teller, making a gesture to imply the presence of a crystal ball.
I'm a Sokovian fortune teller.
Which the guy pretending to be Pietro says is lame.
Lame.
This is pretty directly drawing on ethnic stereotypes about Romani people, who have long been pigeonholed in the media as fortune tellers and mystics with supernatural powers that they may use for evil. In her thesis, The Roma Uncovered, Deconstructing the Misrepresentations of a Culture, Alexi M. Velez explains,
"In cinema we see Roma women, old and reminiscent of fairy tale witches, place hexes on their Western foes. In performance, we see many representations of Roma otherness, particularly through circus performance in the American context and fortune-telling, both of which exaggerate the aforementioned stereotypes. Although most representations of the Roma project them as a powerful people who threaten society and operate supernaturally, the reality is that they have been consistently disempowered and oppressed for the majority of their recorded history."
The image of the Romani fortune teller gazing into a crystal ball with no additional nuance is then just another way that the ethnic group is reduced down to one stereotypical image, which affects the real-world treatment of the actual people who belong to the ethnic group. Meanwhile, in his article From the Romani to the Other, William Stockley provides some context on these stereotypes, how they impact real-life Romani people, and why it's important they be addressed.
For those who believe that all Romani are thieves and beggars, the reality is that literature has had such an influence that mainstream society has forced the Romani into a limited space. Relying on the Western imagination, the Romani often fulfill stereotypical roles such as palm reading as a means to earn a living by exploiting Godzo. A tradition stemming from their Indian heritage, many of the Romani practice fortune-telling as a means of making a living. Yet, it is important to note that not all Romani take part in the practice, nor do they use a crystal ball.
Now, you might be thinking, Eli, you're being sensitive. It was one throwaway line. But both of these essays specifically draw on fictional representations of Romani people in media as a direct source of stereotypes with real-world consequences. By completely refusing to engage with Wanda's ethnicity in any meaningful way, with the closest thing to an actual addressing of it being one throwaway line, the audience of WandaVision is left to cling onto this to build both their understanding of the character and their understanding of the world. An aside like this might feel like a spit in the face to those who may have been holding on to hope that WandaVision would provide positive representation of the Romani people, something the writers absolutely had the potential to do and made the active decision not to. I think that sucks. And now Wanda Maximoff has, until they come up with a half-decent reason to bring her back, gone the same way as her brother. Dead. But hey, who knows? As of the release of Deadpool and Wolverine, the X-Men have been officially added to the MCU, so maybe we'll see Wanda return as Magneto's daughter. I guess anything is possible, but my hopes are not high. So, where do we go from here? Well, we do just about the only thing you can when you hit rock bottom. You try to climb out of the sad little hole. So we've established pretty thoroughly that the Wanda Maximoff we see in the MCU is not even a little bit Jewish. Which begs the question, what characters in the Marvel Cinematic Universe are Jewish? When I say character here, I am only counting someone if they have a name that they use in the actual text of the movie or TV show, and not just the credits. For the sake of whether or not they count as Jewish, I will count a character as Jewish if they call themselves Jewish, are identified in a script as Jewish, wear a kippah, wear a chai, wear a Star of David, wear a tallis, go to synagogue, are shown celebrating a Jewish holiday, or are in some way shown to explicitly engage in Jewish tradition. For example, saying a prayer that is a Jewish prayer, keeping kosher, observing the Sabbath, or stomping on a glass at their wedding. They have to do this in the text of an MCU property for me to include them. As the case of Wanda Maximoff makes clear, the comics don't count. Having a Jewish name also does not count, and neither does being played by a Jewish actor. Many non-Jewish characters in the MCU, from Black Widow to Jane Foster to Ant-Man, are played by Jewish actors, but show no indicator in the text that the characters are Jewish, so I'm not counting any character as Jewish on that basis alone. As always, before I get into any math, it is important for me to note that I am not a statistician. The last time I studied statistics in any formal capacity, it was in my senior year of high school in AP Statistics, and I only got a 3 on my AP exam, so take any of my statistics work with a grain of salt. However, in this case, the math wasn't particularly complicated. So, I went through every single MCU property currently considered canon according to the official Disney Plus MCU timeline and tallied up every single character that fits those criteria, and then I made a bar chart. Cool. Cool. Nice. Let's see that in a pie chart. Yep. Now, you might be saying, but Eli, those are superhero movies where the Norse gods are actually aliens. Why do you expect people to talk about religion? So, here's if I follow those same rules for Christianity. The difference is we can safely assume nearly every character who does not have a specified religion is at least culturally Christian. Also, Judaism is both a religion and an ethnicity, where Christianity is only a religion, so I recognize that this isn't a one-to-one comparison. But also, many of the founding fathers of superhero comics were Jewish, so why don't the superheroes get to be Jewish too? My point here is that Jewish representation in the MCU is sparse, and at time of filming has been exclusively limited to the small screen. In my opinion, the MCU has repeatedly fumbled the bag when it comes to characters who had the potential to serve as Jewish representation. We've already talked about Wanda Maximoff. My other pick for a character who I would have loved to see written as Jewish is Peter Parker. Peter Parker was created by Jews, and despite being ambiguously Christian in the comics, is from a historically Jewish neighborhood and often speaks in Yiddishisms. Some portrayals have opted to write him as Jewish, most notably Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, the best superhero movie ever made. Andrew Garfield says that he views the version of Peter Parker that he played as Jewish, but this has never been confirmed in text. Meanwhile, the MCU Spider-Man, played by Tom Holland, is, potential hot take incoming, for sure the least Jewish Spider-Man to ever appear on screen. In Spider-Man's case, I wouldn't call this erasure because it's never been canon, but I would call it a missed opportunity. You might be asking, why do I care? Well, media representation is important. As Elizabeth Bem-Morowitz and Michelle Ortiz explained in their article, Race, Ethnicity, and the Media,
mass media, as cultural storytellers, serve as widely available and shared sources of stereotype information. Historically, minorities have been underrepresented, stereotyped, and sometimes completely erased from U.S. media. These portrayals have shifted over time, alongside the socio-cultural environment. However, inequities and negative characterizations continue to plague racial and ethnic minorities in the United States.
So, it's important. And there's not that much of it for Jewish people in the MCU. Jessica Jones and The Punisher both feature Jewish side characters whose Judaism is only brought to light when they die through funeral custom. Cool. Let's talk about Moon Knight instead. After the uproar about the ethnic erasure in WandaVision, with some also citing anti-Semitism since Marvel also decided not to take the opportunity to explore Wanda as a potentially Jewish character, the writers of Disney Plus original series Moon Knight endeavored not to make the same mistake, making more explicit their series protagonist's Jewish upbringing. In the first episode, there is a mezuzah on the protagonist's door. This is a Jewish blessing scroll that is mounted on the doorplaces of Jewish homes. We see him wear a Star of David necklace and sit Shiva for his brother and mother. There's a really moving scene where the character throws his kippah to the ground, sobbing, then clutches it to his heart as he breaks down further, showing that he's got a complicated relationship with his faith. Some Jewish viewers criticized Moon Knight for not going far enough in their depiction of Mark Spector's Judaism, citing that it is even more of a core facet of his character in the comics and sort of feels like an afterthought in the show. I understand this perspective, and I think part of it comes from Mark Spector being the first and, for a time, only Jewish protagonist in any Marvel property. That's a lot of pressure on one character to be a good Jew. Personally, I like this depiction. I thought it was a thoughtful way to include Judaism as a part of the character, even in a fairly short series that is mostly about Egyptian mythology. I was just glad it was there. But this is the problem with scarce representation. When there is only one character representing a religious or ethnic group, there is pressure on them to be the perfect archetype of that group. The solution to this cannot be creating one perfect character. It must be to represent many different characters who all belong to the same group and allowing them to all have their own relationships with it. For example, the Ms. Marvel series, another personal favorite of mine, follows a Muslim protagonist, also an MCU first, but she does not exist in a vacuum. She's very immersed in her Muslim community, and throughout the depiction of her family and her close friend Nakia, we see a whole host of different styles of Islamic practice. In my mind, Ms. Marvel is perhaps the best MCU case of representation done right. No one character bears the burden of standing as the sole representative of Islam. Obviously, it would be better if there were Muslim representation across projects and not just in that one TV show, but the creators of the show did a great job working with what they had. There's a lot of nuance, which frequent viewers on this channel may know is my absolute favorite thing. If I make merch, know that I Heart Nuance shirts will be the first thing on the store. You may also notice that none of the Jewish characters that I've listed appear in a Marvel movie. They're all exclusively television characters. So, when are we gonna get a Jewish character in a Marvel movie? Well, I think we may soon, but I wouldn't hold your breath as to it being good news or good representation. It appears at time of filming that the upcoming Captain America movie, Captain America Brave New World, will prominently feature Ruth Bat-Soroff, a character known in Marvel Comics by her superhero identity Sabra. The production on this film has been a mess from the start. It was originally announced under the title Captain America New World Order, which instantly drew sharp criticism for literally just using the exact name of an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. For those who don't know, the New World Order conspiracy theory posits that there is a secret extra-governmental organization made up of elites that is pulling the strings in every major government for their own goals. When they say elites here, they almost always mean Jews. The theory really came into its own during the Cold War, but remains popular among bad people today. It is obviously anti-Semitic garbage, it's not true, and it's used as yet another excuse by those on the alt-right to target Jewish people with hatred and violence. So, after this announcement and the resulting backlash, Marvel quietly changed the film's title to Captain America Brave New World, referencing instead Aldous Huxley's 1932 dystopian novel. I think this change is pretty obviously a good call, as it manages to invoke the dystopian themes likely intended with the original title, but without invoking the anti-Semitic rhetoric. However, the film's controversy did not stop with the title. As I mentioned before, from what audiences know so far, given that the movie is not actually out yet, Captain America Brave New World introduces audiences to the character of Ruth Bat-Soroff. In descriptions of the film, she's described as a black widow working for the American government who just so happens to be of Israeli origin. But in Marvel Comics, Ruth Bat-Saraff is an agent of the Mossad, the Israeli government's real-world intelligence agency. It appears that they are going to change the character's backstory for her inclusion in the upcoming film, but regardless of what they say her backstory is, the character will still be carrying the baggage of her comic book origins. I think even before the events of the past year, including a character like Ruth Bat-Saraff was a tone-deaf decision. With such a dearth of Jewish representation in the franchise, choosing a character who is at best known for her active participation in the Israeli government as the first Jewish character in a big-screen Marvel film only serves to further link the identity of all Jewish people with the actions of the nation-state of Israel, something I think is irresponsible in any political climate. I am of the opinion that when you link the identity of an entire ethnic religious group to the actions of a nation-state, it's a bad deal for the ethnic religious group, because when the nation-state does terrible things, as nation-states often do, the entire ethnic religious group finds itself on the receiving end of the backlash for it, whether or not the individuals in that group have any personal connection to the nation-state or support its actions. I'm not saying here that Jewish folks who support Israel's government are deserving of anti-Semitic hate, and people who oppose Israel's government are not. I obviously don't think anyone deserves to be the target of anti-Semitism. I just disagree with the rhetoric of intertwining the two identities. So, even before the events of the past year, I think choosing Ruth Bat-Saraff as the first and so far only Jewish character to be in a Marvel film was irresponsible. But in the light of the current political climate, in light of the Israeli government's indefensible ongoing actions in the Gaza Strip, indeterminately murdering tens of thousands of innocent Palestinian civilians, I think the choice to have the first explicitly Jewish character in a Marvel film be a woman whose character was dreamt up to be an agent of that government is downright indefensible. I have exactly zero faith in the ability of the writers of Captain America: Brave New World to handle this character with nuance or grace. Palestinian liberation activists are calling for a boycott of the film, and truthfully, I don't think this character is going to make anyone happy, since it seems like they're completely rewriting her backstory in an attempt to avoid having to wade into the very messy pool of touching on Israel at all. There's no way there's going to be a deft or interesting exploration of Israeli identity in a film with Red Hulk in it, so why include this character in the first place? It just seems insensitive all around. It is a legitimately baffling choice to me, when if they wanted a Black Widow type character, there were plenty of better options, and if they wanted a Jewish character, there were also plenty of better options. So the one Jewish character currently in the MCU cannot single-handedly bear the burden of being the only Jewish protagonist, and the upcoming potential Jewish character does not seem like a promising option for good representation. So, what? Are we left only to despair with Judaism marked as either a passing backstory trait or intertwined with the Israeli nationality? But, wait, hang on! There is another Jewish character marked in that chart that I haven't talked about yet. And I was talking about someone in the intro too. There's another Jewish protagonist to discuss here. And buckle in, because we're going to be deciding in real time whether he gets to count as Jewish. For the first 5 episodes of the latest and gayest Disney Plus original Marvel show, Agatha All Along, the character played by Manx actor doing a shockingly good American accent, Joe Locke, was referred to only as Teen. This caused both my sister and my sibling-in-law, both of whom I live with, to start calling me Teen. See, the character had a hex over him that prevented him from revealing any information about himself to other witches, including his own name. The premise of the show follows Teen, evil witch Agatha Harkness, and several other delightful witch characters as they journey down the mythical witch's road, each with their own goals in mind that they hope to achieve by reaching the end of the road. The hex finally breaks at the end of episode 5, when it is revealed that the character referred to as Teen is actually one of the sons of Wanda Maximoff that I mentioned before, who the audience was supposed to think was dead, but had probably pieced together the clues about by the time the reveal actually happened. In episode 6, we finally get some backstory on this character. In flashbacks, we follow ordinary 13-year-old boy William Kaplan as he becomes a bar mitzvah, reading his Torah portion, and then partying with friends and family. These scenes are beautifully done. Though Joe Locke is not Jewish and doesn't look 13 years old, he studied extensively with Rabbi Alexandria Shuval Weiner prior to the episode's filming. Rabbi Shuval Weiner also selected the Torah portion that William reads, Parshat Shemini, in which Nadav and Avihu bring strange fire to the tabernacle to offer to Hashem, who strikes them down with death for the unasked-for offering. As Rabbi Shuval Weiner describes it,
"They were dabbling in stuff they shouldn't have been dabbling in. I just kept hearing in my head the Jewish concept of avodah zarah, worshipping a false idol."
This directly reflects the show's themes. This is pretty much exactly what the character dubbed Teen ends up doing over and over again over the course of the show. When discussing working with Locke, Rabbi Shuval Weiner says,
"Joe was truly a mensch. He's a really nice young man and incredibly respectful. While we were shooting, he didn't do anything without asking. Is this okay? Is anyone going to be insulted by this?"
In my opinion, this is the best case scenario for casting a non-Jewish actor in a Jewish role. Articles around the time of release of Moon Knight described Oscar Isaac, another non-Jewish actor, similarly endeavoring to be respectful in his portrayal of a Jewish character. There was pretty significant backlash at both of these casting decisions, which pretty much boiled down to the idea that non-Jewish actors should not be cast in Jewish roles. Writer Henry Giardina with Hey Alma, a teen Vogue adjacent Jewish online magazine mostly aimed at young Jewish women, although read by me, went so far as to call it Jew face and described it as harmful.
For the audience, specifically the Jewish audience, there's often a tell. Some people might not be bothered by it, but the danger is still real. It even applies to different identities within Judaism. The Sephardic experience is not the Ashkenazi experience, and the American Jewish experience is not the same as any other Jewish experience outside of it. How could it be? When you put on the skin of something that isn't yours, it might not look or feel like the minstrelsy of old, but it's in dialogue with it.
I understand this perspective, and I do think there are times where non-Jewish actors playing Jewish characters can be super disrespectful. For me, I have a line, and it's the fake nose. When a non-Jewish actor wears facial prosthetics to appear more Jewish, I find that legitimately harmful and believe it reinforces stereotypes about how Jewish people should look. Similarly, affecting an exaggerated Yiddish accent reinforces stereotypes about how Jewish people should sound. When cases like this come up, I think it's important to address them as harmful and take those concerns seriously. However, I also think it is possible for non-Jewish actors to portray Jewish characters respectfully. Sure, I would prefer that a Jewish actor be cast in the role for authenticity's sake, but I found Locke's portrayal of William Kaplan as an American Reform Jew believable and respectful, and the scenes were filmed in a real Atlanta synagogue with a real Reform rabbi playing Kaplan's rabbi in the show. Locke did his research, as did the writers of the show, and I want to give credit where credit is due. So, William Kaplan is a Jewish young man who has his bar mitzvah, becomes a man, dances the hora. Yay! Mazel tov, William. At his after party, which is bougie but delightful, there is a fortune-telling booth where another of the show's witches, Lilia, reads William's fortune. She sees something there that she does not like, and also notes that his lifeline is split in two as if he will live 2 lives. Then she puts a hex on William, so he can't talk about whatever it is that she saw in his future that upset her. Driving home, the Kaplans get into a car accident, and William is knocked out in the crash, seeming for all intents and appearances to be dead. However, at the same time as the accident happens, Wanda Maximoff is shutting down the spell that trapped the town of Westview in WandaVision, including releasing the souls of the son she made, I guess? Her son Billy's soul ends up inside of William's empty body, causing the body to come back to life. And thus, William Kaplan becomes Billy Maximoff. Kind of. He doesn't seem to remember any of his time as Billy except for the existence of his twin brother Tommy, whose name he screams when he wakes up in the backseat of the car, and who he journeys onto the Witch's Road in a quest to bring back. Billy lives William's life for the next 3 years before embarking on the quest for the Witch's Road. He doesn't have any of William's memories, but he does have the power to read people's surface thoughts, and he pretends to regain the memories in order to make William's parents, who he thinks of and treats as his own parents, be less worried about him. This is the only normal life Billy has ever known. His time as Wanda Maximoff's son was brief and altered frequently by magic. The 3 years where he lives as the son of Rebecca and Jeff Kaplan are real. He becomes emo, gets a boyfriend, presumably goes to school. He lives. He thinks of the body he inhabits as his own. There does seem to be some latent anxiety that he may have killed William by inhabiting the body, but the show soothes it, saying that sometimes boys just die. But this absolutely wild series of events does beg the question, which I keep seeing in Instagram comments and Tumblr posts and Reddit threads: is Billy Maximoff Jewish? Here are a few comments that argue that he isn't on an Instagram post where Hey Alma praises the William Kaplan bar mitzvah scene in episode 6.
And then he dies and becomes Billy, and William and his Judaism are erased.
Like, yeah, great scene, but also they killed him right after and had a goy possess his body and steal his life, so not great.
I love the fact that they had Jewish representation, but they killed the Jewish character soon after and had someone, presumably not Jewish, inhabit his body.
These comments all fundamentally make the same argument. William Kaplan was Jewish, but Billy Maximoff is not, presumably because his mother Wanda was not Jewish. Therefore, his soul is not Jewish, and so even though he is inhabiting a Jewish body, he himself is not Jewish. Also, some argue that he's a witch, so he's pagan or whatever. We'll start with the soul thing. Settle in, let's get metaphysical. In Judaism, there is the idea of a Jewish soul. This is linked to the concept that all of the Jewish souls that have ever been or will ever be were present at Mount Sinai when Moses made a covenant, a compact, almost like a deal, with God that created Judaism as it is known today. As described in the Midrash in Shemot Rabbah 28:6, a biblical commentary written by ancient rabbis,
as Moses says to Israel, rather, with him who is here with us standing today before the Lord our God, and with him who is not here with us today. Deuteronomy 29:14. It is not written here, standing with us today, but rather, with us today. These are the souls of people who are destined to be created, which lack substance, in whose regard standing is not stated. Even though they were not there at that moment, each and every one received his due.
If you don't quite follow that, welcome to Torah study. Basically, it's being said here that the Israelites, the group that would become the Jewish people, who stood at Sinai included all who are destined to be created, aka the souls of people who have not yet been born. There's an adjacent idea of reincarnation here that says that Jewish souls go to a heaven-y place after death, but may return to a body in order to continue to seek knowledge. There is also the belief that these souls may sometimes be born into Gentile bodies, that is non-Jewish, and people who convert to Judaism are often considered to have always had Jewish souls, even though they are only bound to follow halakha, or Jewish law, after conversion. This is a commonly held Jewish belief, though, like pretty much every single other piece of rabbinic interpretation, not every Jew abides by or believes in it. I read an interesting dissenting opinion on it on a blog called Kol HaSeradim, which I've included in my bibliography, the link to which is, as always, in the video description. But for now, we're going to treat it as truth for the sake of discussion. If you're Jewish and you disagree with me, fair enough. I'm not going to repeat the phrase, if you're Jewish and you disagree with me, that's your prerogative as a Jew, every time I say something about the Torah or rabbinic teachings, but know that it's implied. Like most things in Judaism, it's always up for discussion. The argument against Billy being Jewish hinges on an assumption that Wanda created Billy's soul, as well as his brother Tommy's, meaning it could not have been present at Sinai and thus his soul is not Jewish. I don't personally think that this is true. If this were the case, I don't think Billy or Tommy's souls would have survived the collapsing of Westview, and spoiler alert, they both did, and were able to find new bodies through the use of Billy's magic. I think there's a reasonable argument that Billy's magic sustained those souls, but I don't really buy it. I don't really think Wanda can make true souls out of nothing, laws of physics aside, and if she could, and one of those souls had the exact ability set that she does, it implies the existence of a sort of infinite witches glitch that I don't think Marvel really wants to deal with. So I'm gonna say we don't know if Billy's soul is a Jewish soul or a non-Jewish soul. I have no proof that it's a Jewish soul, except, of course, that it ended up in a Jewish body. We take as canon, religious canon, not Marvel canon, the idea that a Jewish soul enters a Jewish baby when a Jewish baby is born. That is, there's no concept in Jewish mysticism that someone could be born into a Jewish body to Jewish parents but not have a Jewish soul. How many more times can I say the word Jewish? Personally, I think that logic may as well apply when a soul ends up in a body a little later than usual. Perhaps Billy's soul is a Jewish soul and sought out a Jewish body, as Jewish souls are often understood to do. Or, not. I don't think we have satisfactory evidence one way or the other. For the record, in Marvel Comics, there's no William-Billy split. They're just one character, Billy Kaplan, who was the son of the Scarlet Witch until a demon named Mephisto took him and his brother's souls, and then somehow they escaped, the souls and were born into the bodies of the boys that were named Billy Kaplan and Tommy Shepard. I guess the naming was just a coincidence, who are canonically identical despite being raised to different parents. Billy Kaplan was raised Jewish by Jewish parents and born Jewish, and even though he's also kind of the son of the Scarlet Witch and he has her powers, he's the Kaplan's son. Comics are weird, man. But at least in the comics, no one is arguing about whether or not Billy is Jewish, even after Wanda was retconned to not be at all Jewish. Okay, so if we're undecided on Billy's soul's potential Judaism, or if we want to put aside the idea of a Jewish soul entirely, I think we have to take Billy at his word about whether or not he has a Jewish mother. And the show tells us over and over again that he does. As far as we know, if he took a blood test, it would show him as Rebecca and Jeff Kaplan's son. His lifeline was written on the hands of the son of Rebecca and Jeff Kaplan, right alongside William's, which we learn at the bar mitzvah. The hex that is cast on William also affects Billy, which to me also breaks down the idea that they are completely separate entities and that the body only belongs to William. And perhaps most importantly, Billy calls Rebecca his mom, even when he's not pretending to be William for her sake, even when she's not around. He thinks of Rebecca and Jeff as his parents, and biologically, they are his parents, and Rebecca and Jeff are Jewish. The Talmud, which is a really long book which explores a lot of theological arguments ancient rabbis made and is generally accepted as settled Jewish law, tells us that
the Gemara understands that all the names referred to in the verse as children of Pharaoh's daughter refer to Moses, as it will soon explain. The Gemara asks, Pharaoh's daughter bore Moses? But didn't she merely raise him? Rather, it is telling you that with regard to anyone who raises an orphan boy or girl in his house, the verse ascribes him credit as if he gave birth to him.
That is to say, the Gemara, a key piece of Jewish commentary, considers Moses as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, and this is interpreted to mean that orphans may be considered the children of the people who raised them as much as biological children would be. Billy Maximoff is an orphan boy, and I feel it's fair to ascribe Rebecca Kaplan credit as if she gave birth to him. It's true that the general practice is that when non-Jewish children are adopted into Jewish families, they are still required to convert to be seen as fully Jewish, but I'd argue a conversion isn't necessary here because he is in a Jewish body, so he's Jewish. I also don't think being a witch disqualifies him from Judaism. There are plenty of Jewish witches and Jewish practitioners of folk magic, and there always have been. Kabbalah, Jewish mysticism, is real witchy. And while other characters in Agatha All Along discuss goddess worship, Billy never engages in it, so he's not pagan. He practices magic, but he's not pagan. Also, pagan is really an oversimplified term, and I have a whole lot of personal qualms with it, but that's its own video. So, in my opinion, soul shenanigans aside, I think Billy Maximoff is Jewish. Done. We solved it. I mean, if you're Jewish and you disagree with me, I guess that's your prerogative as a Jew. But I think I'm right. I do not think this is anywhere near the last we will see of Billy Maximoff. I hope we see his brother Tommy soon too, and that Tommy also gets to be Jewish, though I certainly won't count my chickens on that one. But hopefully, next time we see Billy Maximoff on the big screen, this debate will have died down, and we can all joyfully embrace him as the gay Jewish superhero we need. Maybe if we're really lucky, we'll one day get to see his gay Jewish space wedding from the comics adapted too. Oh, personally, I'm not holding my breath. I also hope they'll make a second season of Moon Knight, and hell, while we're being optimistic, maybe after the 18th round of reshoots, Captain America Brave New World won't turn out to be an absolute clusterfuck. anything's possible. But what else could come next? I've got some Jewish characters from comics that I'd love to see in the MCU. With mutants now up for grabs as MCU characters, we've got a wide world at our fingertips of potential exciting representation. Here are my top picks for the MCU's next Jewish protagonist. All of the characters I'm going to mention here have actually already appeared in on-screen adaptations in one form or another, but none of those adaptations are currently canon to the MCU, and I think all of these characters have the potential to appear in upcoming films. I took some fairly mainstream picks, nobody too deep cut. So, let's start with some X-Men. My first round draft pick for an MCU Jewish lead is Kitty Pryde, also known as Shadowcat, a character that somehow has absolutely no cat-related abilities. Her mutation allows her to phase through walls. I'd love to see Kitty in the MCU for a lot of reasons. I really enjoy her character. As of 2020, she is canonically bisexual, and when Elliot Page played her in the 2006 film X-Men: The Last Stand, it awakened some things in me that I would not address for many years to come. On top of being a queer icon, to me, Kitty Pryde is, and always has been, a canonically Jewish character. In her very first appearance in the 1980 comic Uncanny X-Men issue 129, Kitty is wearing a Star of David necklace. By the metrics established earlier, this is absolutely sufficient evidence to confirm her character as being Jewish, but of course in the years since, her Jewish identity has come up plenty more. 5 years later, in the 1985 issue 199 of Uncanny X-Men, we learn that Kitty's grandfather was a Holocaust survivor when she goes to a reception at the National Holocaust Memorial alongside Magneto. Kitty's Jewish identity has stayed a part of her characterization across the 40-some-odd years she's been in X-Men comics. A 2012 issue of All New X-Men had this pretty badass moment where she reaffirms her Jewish identity and compares her experience as being Jewish with her experience as being a mutant.
I'm Jewish. I don't have a quote-unquote Jewish-sounding name. I don't look or sound Jewish, whatever that looks or sounds like. So if you didn't know I was Jewish, you might not know. Unless I told you. Same goes for my mutation. I don't have to wear a visor or have blue fur all over me. I can walk around. Just a young woman of the world. But I'm not. When I was 13, before my mutation kicked in, I was in love with a boy at school. In love. And I followed him around like a puppy dog because I was an idiotic 13-year-old girl. And one day he saw a rabbi walking across the street, and he made the worst anti-Semitic comment ever. I won't even repeat it. He just said this awful thing and laughed, and my heart sank, and then my blood boiled. Boiled. I turned to him and I growled, "I'm Jewish," and he just stared at me like he didn't even realize he said something wrong. Or he didn't know how to compute what I just said. But when I got home, after I was done crying my eyes out, my first heartbreak, I realized I was, maybe for the first time ever, I was really proud of myself. I am Jewish. I am a mutant, and I want people to know who and what I am. I tell people because, hey, if we're going to have a problem with it, I'd like to know.
As I mentioned, Kitty Pryde appeared in a 2006 X-Men movie from Fox, but in the film her Jewish identity is never mentioned, and Elliot Page, who played her, is not Jewish. I want to see her in an MCU film where that is not the case, and she gets to be Jewish on screen. Just put her in a Star of David necklace. A comic artist did it in the 80s, it's not that hard. While we're on the subject of Jewish mutants who talk about their Judaism and their mutant identity as overlapping, I would of course be remiss not to mention Magneto again here. I don't know if anything can quite live up to Sir Ian McKellen's performance as Eric Lensher, though I do think Michael Fassbender did a pretty solid job as well. I've already talked pretty extensively about Magneto in this video, so I won't go too far into it, but I have to mention that I would love to see a new X-Men movie. Sue me, bring back Sir Ian McKellen, let him do it. I know he's not Jewish, he's older now, but I don't care. He would do so good. And while we're at it, they should let him and Charles Xavier, as played by Sir Patrick Stewart, be gay in the movie also. Hire me. I'll write it. I would settle for a wacky sitcom. I want it so bad. Anyway, speaking of gay Jewish mutants, my second mainline pick for the MCU's next Jewish protagonist is another gay Jewish mutant, Bobby Drake, also known as Iceman. Yes, I agree that his power of turning to ice is kind of stupid, and that he really works best in an ensemble cast, so on and so forth. However, I would argue, what if he was gay and Jewish and a mutant in a Marvel movie about him, and it was good actually? While Bobby Drake's gay identity is a fairly recent development in the comics, the seeds were always there. I mean, X2 has that amazing scene where he comes out as a mutant to his parents, and that hit me so hard I wrote a poem about it in high school once. No, you can't read it. Stuff like this has been dogging him his whole comics tenure.
All my life, my folks have been trying to make me normal. You know the routine. Get a good job, marry a nice girl, have 2.6 children, 10 grand in the bank, life insurance, car insurance, insurance. But there was one tiny problem standing between me and the norm.
You're gay. Wait, sorry. What I meant to say was, you're a mutant.
Like Kitty Pryde, in addition to being queer, Bobby Drake is Jewish. Compared to Kitty, Bobby's Jewish identity was a later addition to his character. While he first appeared in 1963's X-Men issue 1, he was only established as Jewish 20 years later in 1984's Iceman issue 1, where he also mentions that he went to Hebrew school, though he may have been joking about that second part.
My dad's Irish Catholic. My mom's Jewish. I was the only kid in Hebrew school who got off for St. Patrick's Day.
Like Kitty Pryde and Magneto, Bobby Drake appeared in several Fox X-Men movies, but was not played by a Jewish actor and was not ever mentioned to be Jewish. Anyway, I say, put him in, coach. Cast a Jewish actor, have him say the Shema before bed, and call it a day. I know the MCU is all either edgelords or comic relief characters, and no one knows how to be earnest right now. Bobby Drake is definitely more of a comic relief kind of guy, so he'd fit right in. Make another Deadpool movie and put him in that one, or just a straight-down-the-barrel X-Men film, but it's in the MCU this time. Or my direct-to-Disney Plus wacky sitcom that's like if Abbott Elementary was set at Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Okay, those are mutant pitches, but I've got one more for you. Last but not least, I want to talk about a character that I know for a fact will be on the big screen soon, even though I have my doubts about whether this character will be portrayed as Jewish. I'm talking, of course, about Ben Grimm, better known as The Thing, the fourth member of the titular Fantastic Four. Ben Grimm was first introduced in Fantastic Four #1, a 1960 comic book written by Stan Lee and illustrated by Jack Kirby. Both of these men, founding fathers of Marvel, were Jewish. Ben seems to have been implied to be a Jewish character from the beginning, with Kirby apparently modeling Grimm after himself and Lee also finding some personal relation to the character. In Bob Batchelor's book, Stan Lee, the Man Behind Marvel, he says,
For many fans, Ben Grimm, Thing, was the group's go-to hero. Kirby modeled the hero after himself and added many of those tough guy characteristics he had acquired himself as a kid on the Lower East Side battling among gang members.
So, if he was conceptualized from the beginning to be Jewish, why did it take 42 years for that identity to be confirmed in the text? Well, the excellent website The Religious Affiliation of Comic Book Characters claims that
Lee and Kirby, both Jewish. Imagine that The Thing was Jewish from the beginning. The character's name, Benjamin Jacob Grimm, is certainly a Jewish one. But during the 1960s, and for a long time afterward, there was a strong taboo in comics and many other popular entertainment mediums against referring to real-world religious affiliations of major characters.
They didn't provide any sources on this, but I agree about the name, and also think it is of note that Kirby drew The Thing wearing a kippah and tallis and reading from a Hebrew prayer book for his family's Hanukkah card all the way back in 1976, but Ben was only actually canonically confirmed to be Jewish in 2002's Fantastic Four, Volume 3, Issue 56. Ben is featured in a story in this issue called Remembrance of Things Past, where he attempts to return a Star of David he stole from a neighbor in his youth on Yom Kippur as repentance for his childhood involvement with a gang. It turns out it's not actually Yom Kippur, but Mr. Scheckerberg forgives him anyways and lets him keep the necklace. In the comic, Ben says the Shema, and a really excellent parallel is drawn between Ben and the golems of Jewish folklore.
Remember the tale of the golem, Benjamin. He was a being made of clay, but he wasn't a monster. He was a protector. Tell you what, this Star of David, you keep it for me. You protect it until I need it back.
I found this legitimately touching. I've read a lot of comic books, so know that when I say this it comes from a place of love, but a lot of them are quite bad. This is true for any medium. There are obviously plenty of awful books and movies and TV shows out there, but comics have the dubious privilege of coming out every week forever and writing and unwriting and rewriting the same characters over and over again, with canon being stacked on top of past canon. So when a comic is bad, it haunts a character forever, you know? Like, remember when I had to talk for a really long time about the parentage of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff earlier in this video and how they got their powers and whatever, and it was really confusing? That's what I mean about comics being bad. That and all the other stuff. Anyway, I only say this to emphasize that this one 2002 issue of the Fantastic Four, a series I have little personal connection to, was actually quite good, and it hit me right in the emotions. So, back to the MCU, the ostensible topic of this video. We know for a fact that Ben Grimm will be hitting the big screen. Allegedly, the Fantastic Four First Steps will be coming out in July of 2025, though, you know, who's to say with the MCU release scheduled lately whether that date is real? My reservations are as followed. First off, the director of this movie is the director of WandaVision, and though he is of Jewish descent, I'm not at all confident that that will translate into an authentic representation of Jewish identity in the film based on his track record. Also, the setting is a 1960s-inspired retro-futuristic world, and if they're doing some other planet alternate timeline thing, I've got no idea how the Our World concept of being Jewish would end up in there. However, I do think this at least stands a better chance of doing justice to Ben Grimm's Jewish identity than any of the other previous film adaptations of the character. Notably, the actor cast to play Ben in this film, Ibn Mashbachrach, is of Jewish descent himself. His father is Jewish, and at least two, but maybe all three of the screenwriters, definitely Josh Friedman and Jeff Kaplan, couldn't find out either way about Ian Springer, are Jewish themselves. Friedman, who wrote the most recent iteration of the script, has talked about being Jewish in interviews and everything. And sue me, I want to be an optimist. I want to watch a Marvel movie that has a Jewish lead and does a good job with it. If there's one thing all the research for this project has shown me, it's that the MCU's representation of Jewish characters has been wildly inconsistent and broadly insufficient. However, I think the depiction of Billy and Agatha All Along was an excellent step in the right direction, and I hope that upcoming MCU projects keep it in mind as an example of thoughtful and tasteful representation. I think the MCU has the potential to bring a lot of incredible Jewish characters from the comics onto the screen. Right now, it feels like we might be headed in the right direction, and I really hope that the good representation some of the Disney Plus Marvel shows have exhibited continues going forward. And, you know, if you're running low on ideas, Kevin Feige, send me an email. I'll write a really good X-Men sitcom. Thank you so much for watching. This is video number 3 on this channel, and I'm really happy that I was able to get this one done, in time for Hanukkah, I guess. Be sure to like this video if you liked it, leave a comment, probably telling me all of the ways I misquoted scripture, or ideally, like, your favorite Jewish characters. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for more media stuff. That's what I do, kind of. I didn't talk about fandom a ton in this one. That's usually more my area of interest, but when I saw Agatha All Along, I really wanted to write this. So here we are. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Bye.